this is a statistic, but it's not a statistic. So I feel like most, so I'm going to say 75%, but I feel like every time I go on a coaching call, most of the people are part-time sellers and they say, I want to become a full-time reseller. How do I do that? Can I do that? And so our whole coaching call for an hour is diving into what are they currently doing? Do we have plans to put in place? Here are the things to think about. And so today's video is really like, it's not a full coaching call because we're not going back and forth, but it's all the things that I kind of generally bring up in those coaching calls for that person to consider. And then obviously I give them more information because I'm deep diving into their exact situation. Here's going to be more general, but what we're trying to figure out today is, can you replace your job with reselling full-time? Download your free reseller resource guide today. I constantly update and share with you discounts, favorites, tools, and resources to help you with your reselling business. After the video, click the link in the description and get your totally free guide today. Can you be a full-time Poshmark seller? And so this is what we're going to dive into today. It does require a lot of notes, so I'm going to be looking down for sure. But I think that there are some critical topics for you to be considering, thinking about, and working towards if going full-time as a Poshmark seller is what you're interested in doing. The first thing that you need to do is start with knowing your numbers now. Where are you now? Are you doing well? Or are there things that you need to fix first before you can go full time? Can you actually do the full time? So where are you now? Know your numbers. You need to know what your active listings are and how many things you're listing a day or a month, how many things you're selling a month. You need to know what your sell-through rate is. You need to know what your ASP is. You need to know what your average COGS are. And so if all of that is like, blah, 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 Rebecca, then go back and watch these two videos that I did before this one. One is Reseller Math Part-Time Seller, and one is Reseller Math Full-Time Seller, where I go through a breakdown of all of the specific numbers so that you can see a full example laid out with exactly how much you would make in profit and how much you can pay yourself based on part-time and full-time. And so that's a really good exercise to do first. Then you can come back to this video and then kind of deal with the shoulda, woulda, coulda, is this right for me kind of stuff. These are all critical things. So I think step one is the reseller math of it all and knowing your numbers and where you start. The next thing you need to know, once you've gotten that figured out, is where are you going and what do you need to happen? Because this is where people get a little bit cuckoo because they say, oh, I want to make $100,000 as a reseller, but they're not even making $100,000 now in their full-time job. They want to make $100,000 as a reseller, but their business is barely making $20,000 now. How do you go from that to this? You need to have a plan. We're going to talk about those other things, but we need to know where you're going. We need to be on the same page. So what numbers do you need? What is your monthly amount of money that you need to pay yourself? Is it the same as your full-time, or are there other things to consider? We're going to talk about that. Are you the only supporter of your, household? Do you not rely on your income because maybe there's a spouse or partner that brings in the main income and yours is like the bonus income? Are you a single person and so it kind of doesn't matter and you're happy to like couch surf? And so it's like not a big deal. Like everybody's got a different situation. You need to know what your monthly nut is. You need to know how much money do you need to pay yourself. And then with that reseller math example from the other videos, you can then back that out to figure out how much money do you need to make. What do you need to list? How many things do you need to sell? What does your ASP need to be? All of that stuff. So what do you need to live? What is your listing goal? All of these things are critical to know. And if you are someone that can't handle figuring that out, I don't think you should be a full-time reseller because this is how your life is going to go. It doesn't mean that, I guess there's people that could be full-time resellers that never pay attention to this, but I don't think that's the majority of the people. I think the majority of full-time resellers need to know all these numbers so you can know if you're going to make it or not. And so I think it's critical. And if it's all too much for you and you don't want to deal with it, then you may not be the right fit to be a full-time reseller. So That's kind of where are you going? You need to know those numbers. Where are you now? Where are you going? Now, the next critical step, once you have those things in place, you know what your numbers are now, you know what your numbers you need to be. So now how do you bridge the gap between where you are now and where you're going? Most of us need to fix things. Most of us are not perfect. And so most of us have to make sure that our photos are better, or that our photo process is better, or that our equipment is upgraded, or that we hire someone to list for us because we're never going to be able to do the amount of listings that we need to make the money we want to make, or we just don't want to. Do we need to figure out a space situation because we don't have the space in our apartment to hold the number of listings that we need to make the money that we need to make? Maybe we need to scout storage unit places, work out a deal with a friend, or get a bigger apartment, or ask your husband for a reseller room like I did. So, there's lots of things. Maybe you need to know more keywords. Maybe you need to up level the types of items because you need to raise your ASP. You've identified based on where you are and where you're going that you need a higher ASP. Maybe you need to identify a source because there's no way that you're going to be able to source however many 100 items you need to list per month to make a full-time income that you want. How are you going to source all those items and do all the other work? Maybe you need a partner like, let's say, Helpsy Source, like I use, where you order in bulk and it gets shipped to your door. I use code Rebecca the Reseller to get 10% off your order. So there's lots of things. You may need to put an automation procedure in place, and I have videos on that. So there's lots of things that potentially, because you might be one of those perfect part-time sellers that's ready to just all of a sudden become a full-time seller, but maybe not. Most of us are not. And so you need to figure out what's going to get you from where you are to where you're going. What's that punch list of things that need to be accomplished? You need to start working on those things before you can go full time. You need to have all that in place. And that might take a while because you can work through it little by little. Vendoo is an essential hub for my reselling business. I've used Vendoo for years now to create drafts, list on multiple platforms, cross-post quickly, relist easier and faster than on Poshmark, manage my inventory, track analytics, and tons more. Vendoo more than pays for itself. In fact, I showed in the past how a $34 a month investment in Vendoo made me over $24,000 by cross-posting to Mercari alone. Most discount codes are only for 20%, but my Vendoo discount code gets you 30% off your first month. Use my link to sign up for your free trial, and then you get your 30% off with my code and link. Next, are you consistently consistent? This is probably one of the big things that comes up often on coaching calls is I will ask people in their background information form, what are you listing per day? What are you selling per day? All their things. And they'll say I'm listing 5 to 10 listings per day. That's one of the choices they get to pick. But then when I talk to them on the phone, they say, well, on Sunday I probably list 10 items, but then, during the week, my son has baseball. Sometimes I get migraines. And so I'll list like 2 or 3. And then sometimes, I don't list for a couple days and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm going to do a video, or it might have already happened. I don't know. I'm recording a million videos today. Somewhere on my channel will be a video about how to be consistent. But being consistently consistent is the way that you get consistent, reliable results from your business. And if you're a full-time reseller, you need to pay your bills. Therefore, you need consistent, reliable outcomes from your business. So you know that you need to make a certain amount every month, which means you need to sell a certain amount every month, which means you need to do a certain amount every month. And it gets really hard when you're not consistent because then your results become inconsistent. And then that's how you end up going back to your full-time job. So if you struggle with being consistent, watch that video that I mentioned about being consistent as a reseller and really try to work through and practice that, because it's not like going to a job, and everybody's job is different. So I don't know what your job is, but a lot of it is without you having to do it. Like you go there, you do the things, but there's other people that prompt you and you know you need to get your paycheck, and it's kind of a habit thing. But when you're a reseller and you have to make everything up yourself and you have no other outside forces coming in to prompt you and trigger you, and I mean trigger you like in a good way, not in a bad way, it is more difficult. Not everyone is successful at doing that. And so it's better, I think, that you figure that out ahead of time than the hard way after you quit your job. So I'm just saying all of this, not to make anyone upset, but because I care about you, generally speaking, and I don't want anyone to think that it's easy to be a full-time reseller. I don't want anybody to think that it's so simple, because it's not. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot that you have to do. And if you want to go through and not be stressed out all the time, then there's even more that you need to think about and go through. I used to be really stressed out. Now I've kind of put a lot of things in place where I made peace with a lot, and there's safeguards, so I know it's going to be okay. So anyway, can you find enough good stuff to fuel your business? So this was going on the sourcing thing. Like if you identify that you need to list 500 items per month or 800 items per month or 1,000 items per month, again, going back to those reseller math videos and all of your numbers, whatever amount you need to list, you need to figure out how to source. And if you're not sourcing that amount now, you don't know how to source that amount. So can you do it? That is a big part of it. And sometimes the hardest part is making sure that you have enough things to list without sacrificing, your ASP, because then you're basically working for padiddly squat. So, if I relied on the bins to support my full-time business as a reseller, it would not happen. And that's why I changed from a bins buyer to a bulk sourcer, because I realized how I ran my business when I shopped at the bins was never going to get me to a full-time reseller. But once I switched over to having criteria for what I listed and bulk sourcing, then I was able to raise my ASP so that I could manageably do the number of listings to make the money I wanted to make. So I think that that's a whole thing in and of itself that you need to go down the road of. Identifying how you are going to put a plan in place to source those items that you need based on the numbers to fuel your business. Can you physically do the work required? So this isn't for everyone, but there are many, many people that watch my channel that I know have told me that they have a challenge. They have some type of chronic illness, a disability, a mental issue, something that prevents them from potentially going to a traditional job of some kind, or prevents them in some way for doing the part-time work as a reseller. And so therefore, how can you expect to be a full-time reseller if you have trouble in this area, whatever it is in your unique situation? How can you do the full-time stuff if you have trouble doing the part-time stuff, or if you have trouble doing the full-time work elsewhere? So I'm not saying that as you can't do it. I'm not judging. It is a thing to consider if this is something that, raises a flag for you, because it is physically demanding to be a reseller. To be sourcing is standing up a lot. To be photographing can hurt your back. You have to lift bins up to the top shelf. Like, there's lots of things that go. I'm sweating a lot. Like when I do I'm in Florida, but I feel like oftentimes I do things for reselling. I'm like, I am sweating right now. So I think you need to think about that. Can you physically do this work? Can you do it to the level that you need to fulfill those full-time numbers? Maybe you can do it part-time, but could you do that level of work as a full-time person? So that's important. And, that could also be like, let's say you have a baby at home and you can do it with a baby part-time, but could you do it with a baby full-time? Like, that could be it too. It might not even be like your own limitation. It may just be like a life limitation. Like, can you physically do everything you need to do full-time? So there you go. Practice it for a short time. What does it feel like? So some people, like many teachers, do big time reselling over the summer because that's when they can, because they're off for the summer from teaching. If you're somebody that's a teacher, you have that time and you can put all the work into it, you can test drive that and be like, did I make a full-time living? Can I do it? Did I hit the numbers? Maybe you save up your vacation time from work, you take 2 weeks off, and you practice what would you do as a full-time reseller for 2 weeks. What does that look like? If you find yourself in between jobs, maybe that's when you practice. But if you can practice, that gives you a really good idea of what does it feel like to be a full-time reseller. Even if you're not making the money yet, but doing the things, what does that feel like? Can you get there? Is this something you still want to do? Vendoo is an essential hub for my reselling business. I've used Vendoo for years now to create drafts, list on multiple platforms, cross-post quickly, relist easier and faster than on Poshmark, manage my inventory, track analytics, and tons more. Vendoo more than pays for itself. In fact, I showed in the past how a $34 a month investment in Vendoo made me over $24,000 by cross-posting to Mercari alone. Most discount codes are only for 20%, but my Vendoo discount code gets you 30% off your first month. Use my link to sign up for your free trial, and then you get your 30% off with my code and link. Personal savings. Anytime I think somebody goes out on their own and does an entrepreneurial venture, whether you're a reseller, starting your own lemonade business, starting your own, social media influencer, like whatever you want to quit your job to do. In our case, it's reselling. I think that you need to have personal savings in place to be responsible for whether it's just you or your family. You need to have some kind of safety net. So if it's not personal savings, but a safety net of you could go back to live with your parents or whatever, you need to think about that. You have to plan as if you failed, but work as if you succeeded. You can't just put those blinders on and be like, I'm going to make, all this money being a reseller. You have to plan that you're going to fail so that you will be okay. I don't want anybody to not be okay. So make sure that you have personal savings before you make a leap into being a full-time reseller. Make sure that you have money in the bank, 3 to 6 months, whatever you think you need for yourself, just have some personal savings. Then I think you should have some business savings. I talked about this in the full-time reseller math video. I always have $10,000 in my business, always. That's not to pay myself. That's not for anything but an emergency in the business. And then I have personal savings. And so this, in case that sales go crazy for a month or two, I can still pay myself, I can still pay the people that help me, and I can meet all of my financial obligations like my automation, my storage unit. I can still buy inventory. I have that money there. So if a big deal comes up and I can buy, a truckload of whatever, rock bottom prices, I could pounce on that deal because I have buckets of money in my business ready and waiting to be deployed. Most of the time I don't touch it. Most of the time I just keep it there. But it makes me feel good and less stressed to know that it's there. And it also makes me feel good and less stressed to know that I have personal savings as well. That's the responsible thing to do. You could not do it, but I think it's important to do. Now, the other thing is your health insurance, days off, vacation time, perks. I think you should sit down and brainstorm, what do you get from your job? Even if you don't care, even if you don't like it, but what do you get that you don't even realize that you get from your job that you won't get from reselling? You're not going to get health insurance. You're not going to get days off, vacation time, or you get maybe a couple perks, but not that many. So think about that. Do you have an expense account? Do you get a gym membership? Do you get to take free stuff home all the time? Do you get discounts places? Aside from, obviously health insurance. All of those things have some kind of value to your life, maybe. You're using them in some way. And so if you're not taking that into consideration, the amount of money that you need to take home as a full-time reseller may change as a result of thinking about this. Because in the beginning, when I said go check out that reseller math, I don't account for health insurance in there. I can't possibly know what everybody's individual situation is. So it's just based on the reseller math. But then you need to decide, okay, well, if I'm going to make, that video goes over how to make $60,000 as a full-time salary, then if you have to pay for health insurance on top of that, that might not help you meet your bills. Now you really might need to make $80,000, let's say, and then those numbers completely change. So you have to think before you quit your job of all the things that your job gives you that reselling isn't going to give you, and that you will need to pay for, take care of, or go without. And the other thing is those vacation days. You know, we are lucky. We go on a lot of vacations. I set up my business in a weird way where I take extended periods of time off. I bulk do a lot of work, and then I take extended periods of time off, basically around the school year for my son. So over the summer, I barely do any work, but I still make the same amount of money all year round. So I set up the business that way, but it's taken me years to do that, and that's unique to me. So for you, in your situation, you need to figure out, like, what if you get sick? What if you're someone who always gets sick? What if you're someone that has a lot of doctor's appointments? What if you have a child that has a lot of doctor's appointments? What if you go for 2 weeks to see whoever in the whatever beach, and what's going to happen to your business for those 2 weeks? How are you going to account for that? So paid vacation, time off, you don't get those things. So you need to figure out how you're going to make that work in your business. And perks too, that's important. And so my final thoughts are, I think that there's a lot to consider here. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I want the best for you. And I want you to know all the things that go into being a full-time reseller. I think people that are the best candidates for being a full-time reseller are the people that have a really successful part-time reselling business. Someone that is making more or comparable to their full-time salary as a part-time reseller is someone that will do well as a full-time reseller, most likely, because you've already figured out in your limited time as a part-time seller how to make the most of it and how to make that money significant. And so now, without the distraction of a job, you could pop over here to the full-time side and expand that, and then absorb like the health insurance thing and absorb some of those other problems. You could probably more easily put a business fund together, more easily get your savings up. There's a lot more that you could do as a successful full-time seller if you're already a successful part-time seller. Now, if you're not a successful part-time seller, if you're making only a couple $100s a month from reselling part-time, that's okay, because you're doing it part-time, and it's okay, and don't feel bad about that. It just means that your journey to potentially being a full-time seller might be longer. There may be more things that you need to account for, more things you need to fix, more things that you need to upgrade so that you could potentially get there. Or as you do it, you may realize that it's not worth it, and you just stick with your job, and then you stick with part-time reselling, get a little bit better at part-time reselling, and make a lot of money that way. There's nothing wrong with having a job and then being a part-time reseller and making buckets of money. That's amazing. I mean, my full-time job is I'm a mom. That's my full-time job. So this part-time job that I have makes me full-time money, but I do it part-time. So I think that you can set it up however you want. You can do whatever you want, but I just wanted to be that voice of reason that says, whoa, slow down. Before you think you want to be a full-time reseller, here are some things you want to consider. I've got some thoughts, and I want you to consider them so that you don't end up in a pickle. Nobody wants a pickle. Nobody wants a reseller in a pickle. So that's all I have to say on that. I wish you all the best of luck. Let me know what questions you have down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.